So welcome. Today is day 4,821 that Boswell's been in business. And here to do some conversational partnering for the evening is Justin Barney, music director of 88.9 Radio Milwaukee. Appropriate, thank you. Thanks, of course, to you, and thanks to Radio Milwaukee, of course, for co-sponsoring this event. Always a pleasure to work with them. We're really excited for tonight's event. I'm really excited with Nabil Ayers. Welcome. He's president of Beggars Group US, where he's worked with Grammy winners like The National. He was co-founder of Sonic Boom Records, music shop in Seattle, and here's a retail business. We always love other retail-minded folks. He's written about music and race for publications like the New York Times. You've heard of it. NPR, The Root, others. And tonight he's here for his memoir, My Life in the Sunshine, Searching for My Father and Discovering My Family. Give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Justin.
Hey, Nabil.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Doing this.
I'm a little hot.
Hot mic.
This before you start this started because occasionally Nabil's record label will fly me out to New York to interview a band, and one time we were out there and we were talking about we were just talking.
U.S. Girls or Big Thief is one of the bunker things. I think
it was Big Thief, and we were talking. And I remember I was talking about Hanif Abdurraqib's book, who is thanked in the credits.
Yeah.
And I was like, I love memoirs. And Nabil was like, I'm begun to write mine. And from then on, I have been pressuring Nabil to send it to me as soon as it was done and to do this event as soon as we could. So thank you for.
Thank you. The funniest thing about this is that we're 1 week in right now. The book came out a week ago today. And I'm in the middle of a book tour, and every one of my friends looks at it. They're like, "Wow, this looks great. Why Milwaukee?" No offense to Milwaukee. I'm very happy to be here, but then I tell that story, and it's great.
One very pushy little guy. So thank you.
So I guess I'll start by reading something from the book because it's a reading, and then we'll talk, and then we'll talk, and then we'll hang out outside where it's nice. So I'm going to start with the intro because I assume at this point in the cycle, no one's read this book and no one knows anything. So if you were to read it, this is how it would start. It's called Straight Outta Compton. When I see a movie theater advertising Straight Outta Compton, I know how I'm about to spend the next 2 hours. What better setting, I think, to watch a blockbuster about the LA rap group NWA than this, the city from which it emerged. It is the summer of 2015, and I'm in Los Angeles for the FYF Music Festival, where backstage I am repeatedly mistaken for a newly famous director who has made music videos for Kendrick Lamar, Kanye West, and Frank Ocean, and goes simply by his first name, Nabil. When I am introduced to some people, it's telling to hear their voices suddenly become more hip-hop, attempting to drop a bit of street into their words, an affectation they adopt only when they think they're meeting the rap video director. Not that Nabil always elicits a humble apology. People aren't aware that even though he has made videos for hugely famous Black artists, Nabil is half white and half Iranian and looks much more white than I do. While I was hoping to spend today at the festival with the artists I work with, instead I slowly walk around the newly revitalized downtown Los Angeles, recovering from a terrible case of food poisoning. The thought of seeing Straight Outta Compton in a comfortable, air-conditioned theater is much more appealing than the sensory overload of a crowded music festival. I force down the rest of my banana, guzzle my remaining seltzer, and still feeling weak, buy a ticket to the matinee. Compton begins with a bang. In 5 fast minutes, the Los Angeles police destroy a drug house. Bullets and expletives fly, vicious dogs bark, and armed vehicles smash through residential walls like they're made of paper. And I'm completely sucked in, happy to have my mind numbed by Hollywood action, even if the portrayal is devastatingly true to life. The bombastic opening scene ends, and the ensuing silence is broken by a piano sound, followed by an unmistakably familiar, lazy synthesizer melody. My pulse suddenly feels very present in my body. The song's patient, buoyant pace drives the camera's slow movement, which reveals a bedroom adorned with posters, records, DJ gear, and eventually a teenage boy lying down with his eyes closed and headphones wrapped around his head. The character, meant to be NWA founder and producer, Dr. Dre, wears a Los Angeles Dodgers jersey and hat as he subconsciously airplays the piano, the congas, and the synthesizer along with the song. The overhead shot shows a record spinning with a legible red Polydor label at its center. The scene, which contains no dialogue, does everything to convey that Dre is lost in the music. The camera closes in on Dre, surrounded by album jackets, and I brace myself, knowing what I'm about to see. And there it is, one album standing apart with its white border. A man in a tight yellow t-shirt, a beard, and an afro stands against a bright yellow background. His hand rests confidently on his hip, and he smiles and looks off camera, radiating casual conviction. I can't read the album title, but I don't need to. I already know the man on the cover. The music is so loud that I physically feel it in my chest and ass. The lyrics offer the first voices in the scene. My life, my life, my life, my life in the sunshine blasts from the modern theater speakers, and the chorus of male and female vocals further shakes my weakened constitution. I am alone in a dark movie theater 3,000 miles from home, feeling skinny and sick and completely caught off guard by the most famous song by my father, Roy Ayers. Everybody Loves the Sunshine was a moderate hit when it was first released in 1976, but it's grown over time. It's been sampled more than 100 times by various artists, including Mary J. Blige, Common, J. Cole, Tupac, Snoop Dogg, and Black Eyed Peas. It's been covered by D'Angelo and Chibo Matto, spanning decades and constantly refreshing itself into modern context. I've heard it in many different iterations over the years, a perennial, persistent reminder of my otherwise absent father. After one long minute of music, Dre's mother surprises him by turning off the record, which snaps him out of his meditative state. My chest feels hot and my breath is short. My first reaction is to sink into my cushy chair and look around the theater to see whether anyone is looking at me. Is this what it would feel like to run into him? I wonder. I'd last seen my father 9 years earlier when I was 34, but that had been planned, a lunch in Seattle, my first ever meeting with him as an adult. The time before that, when I was 11, I had no idea who he even was. Since moving back to New York City, where he lives, I'm always slightly subconsciously on guard, ready to run into him, but I definitely wasn't expecting it in a dark movie theater in Los Angeles while getting over food poisoning. Though my father and I live in the same city and are both in the music business, our paths have never crossed in the 7 years I've lived in New York. Occasionally, someone asks me how he's doing. It surprises me every time, and I usually respond with something like, "You'd probably know better than I would," which feels confrontational and often leads me to quickly offer a slightly apologetic, less biting explanation that he's never been a presence in my life. How, I wonder, did a hippie child in New York City who never knew his father become a grown man who still didn't know his father, but encountered his music regularly? Were moments like these truly coincidental, or had my father's DNA guided me into a life in music and ultimately to the places where his presence caught me off guard? It's been over a year since I last tried to contact my father, and though I was unsuccessful, I decide it's time for another try. I know he won't become the father I'd never had, but maybe he can become the father I meet for lunch once or twice a year, the father who tells me about his life and my family history, the father who texts me each year on my birthday. He might not respond, but even if my father ignores me, I will have tried. Little do I know in that moment that the impact of that minute in the theater, the intensity of hearing my father's music, my music, in a public place through huge speakers and staring at his picture on a giant screen will be the catalyst that opens up 2 centuries of perspective on my family.
In the book, you said that you had heard and listened to that song many other times. Why did it hit you so hard in that moment?
I'm trying to think. 2015. So at that point, it's gone through so many different sort of phases in my life where as a kid, I wouldn't hear it on the radio or anything. I think we just played it. And then as an adult in the music business, it would show up once in a while. And I started to hear it being sampled and hear it other places. But I think I think it's because I probably hadn't heard it in a while and had actually hung out with him not that long, but it was years, but it still felt like not that long before, and was still affected by the fact that after that meeting, he didn't really get back to me. And that was the first time that I'd kind of felt bad about my relationship, my non-relationship with him. So this was sort of, and it was also such a surprise, and it was so dramatic and such a long scene, and I was sick. There were just so many things happening at once that I think it just really kind of hit me.
Were you, do you think you were upset because of how much recognition it got?
I don't think so. I think that's always made me happy.
Really?
Yeah, I really do love the song, and I'm happy that people like it and that it's done well for him. Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to write a book like this. You know?
Thanks. I think. Thanks.
And you are the most successful person I know in the music business. You know, like you are the president of Beggars. I mean, that it is incredible. And I think that people that write the kind of memoir, that write a memoir at where you're at in life, it is usually aren't I so great? Right. Aren't I so great? This is my rags to riches story. Right. And nothing has ever been difficult in my life. And you can too, if you only persist as much as I have. Right. Were you tempted to do that, or how did you find this balance?
I never tried to write a book. This came from me writing shorter pieces and just kind of discovering about 6 years ago that I really loved to write. And I didn't really know that. I loved to write in college, and the only A I got in college was in a writing class. So I
saw that in the credits.
But then, then I started working in a record store and played in bands and never needed to write anything longer than an email after that. So it kind of went away. And then I just started writing 5 or 6 years ago. I turned 50 this year. I think I was old enough that I felt like I've had some really funny stories and good stories and even bad stories that I've told so many times that they're really fresh in my head. And wouldn't it be fun to just start sort of telling them to the computer? So I was just doing it for fun and writing about the record store I used to own and the bands I used to play in. And my wife, who was reading them, and I published a couple and really loved that. It reminded me of being in a band in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
She said, this is all fun and everything, but you need to write about your father and your race, because that's what you care about. And that's what other people will be interested in. And so I knew she was right. And I knew that it would be harder. So I just started doing it with no plan to even publish that stuff. My idea was just I'm going to try that because I think she's right. And I'm just going to write about the times I've met my father, the 4 or 5 times in my life that I've met him. And then maybe I'll write about the times that I heard his song somewhere, because that's sort of the equivalent in that scene, for instance, of what it feels like to meet him. And wrote a bunch of those, and also a lot of record store stuff and a lot of band stuff. And I think finally realized, oh, wow, this could actually be a book. And I've already done, I don't mean, I had a ton of work to do, but I did a lot of this sort of digging, the emotionally hard part. I enjoyed doing, writing about my father and writing about those scenes. So that's what kind of convinced me that it was possible. But I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to write a book, page 1. I don't think I could have done that.
I love that, because I get a sense of that. I remember when you told me that you were writing a memoir, I was like, I love writers, and I think it's to write is an incredible thing to do. So I appreciate that. And in talking about Roy in this, in the beginning here, it is important that we note the kind of the arrangement that went into this. So I think that's important. No, could you explain the arrangement between your mom and Roy?
When my mother, who I'm still very close with, lives in New York, I see her all the time. When she was 20, she lived in New York City. This is in early 70s. And the way she tells it, and she has an incredible memory, she's like, I knew I wanted to be a young single mother. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wanted a child. I wanted a best friend. I wanted someone who I could give a better childhood than I had. And when she met Roy, she said, that's the guy. And it wasn't, that's the person I want to marry, or that's the person I want to be with. It was, that's the person whose child I want to have. And I think dating would be an overstatement. I think they hung out a few times and she said, I want you to give me a child. You don't have to be involved. And he said, okay. So it is, arrangement feels like a cold, weird term, but I mean, that's kind of what it was. And it was odd, but everyone kept their end of the deal.
One key person did not consent to this arrangement.
They didn't exist at the time.
But that,
Yeah.
that is important to note. There was on page 47, you say, she never apologized for her decision to have me, knowing that he wouldn't be around. An apology was never expected. And I read that and I was like, the word expected is doing a lot of work here. Did you ever want an apology from your mom?
No, I think what was so interesting about my life and our lives is that she didn't really know what she was doing, but she did kind of know what she was doing, and that she didn't have any money, but she had a great support system. Her younger brother, my uncle, who I'm still really close with, was basically my father figure. He's the person who got me into music. But for the first, I mean, my father's Black, my mother's white. We were on welfare, obviously single parent, all this stuff. It sounds terrible on paper, but the first 10 years of my life were incredible, like really idyllic. We just lived in New York and Boston, or Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Amherst, which was, very particularly incredible, in these communities where I wasn't weird at all.
Mm-hmm.
There were tons of mixed race kids, tons of kids of different races, tons of kids with single parents. And so it was never a thing. And so I think for that reason, and the fact that my mother she never resented my father. She was grateful because that's what she wanted. And so I never heard anything like, oh, if your father was around, or if he sent us money, like those thoughts or phrases didn't exist. So I never was taught to think anything was wrong, because it really wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember ever feeling angry or jealous of other kids, and it might have been different if I'd lived in, perfect suburbia with a bunch of white kids who had two parents, which I did later, but at least I had this base established by that time.
You're on page 1 of the book, you describe Roy as being ambitious, self-centered, focused on his career, and not available to your mother. There's a part of me that wants to say, what of those do you have? But also I want to know, like, what would you describe your mother as having? Because she is such a huge part of this. And I get there's a lot of like evaluating Roy, and there's a lot of your mother in this, not to say that you don't talk about her, because you very much do. And she has incredible recall that you obviously come back to, and might also share as well. What are the things that you got from your mom?
I think, well, it's hard to contrast them with what I got from my father, because I can only guess.
Right. Right.
And it's based on so few meetings. So, and there are some guesses, but from her, I think there's a real strong need, I was going to say willingness, but a need to connect with people that I don't think he has. And I might be wrong.
Yeah.
But my mother is so good at reaching out to and finding new family members. Her father, my grandfather, I think had 12 siblings. So there are tons of cousins all over the world. And she's still to this day is like, I found another one, and she'll be on a Zoom with them. And now they're best friends. And I've always admired that. And it's really incredible. And I think that's a lot of what drove me later in the book and later in my life to sort of search out people on my father's side, even though I couldn't really connect with him. But I see that as a huge quality that she has. It's a great one. On my father's side, it's an interesting one, which of those qualities I have, because my mother always described his self-centeredness as a negative quality.
Mm-hmm.
But I always kind of thought that it was more positive than negative. When she talked about it in a way like he's into his music, he wasn't available, he was self-centered. It's like, right, that's what he was doing. And so I mean, you don't do this if you don't have some That's how big my name is on there. Didn't have to. So I think I certainly got some of that. And I don't think it's negative, but I think it's a sort of, an affinity for attention and for putting yourself out there and being noticed. And I think that comes more from my father than my mother.
I think that response is just like, so like when you read the book and there's like a through line of your writing, and there is a part of it that I'm like, Nabil is just so pragmatic. I think just so pragmatic, so diplomatic, and like every situation in which you could get mad about someone who, who like treated you wrong, or there was like a racial microaggression or a macroaggression, and you like in every single situation you're able to see the humanity in other people, which is just very much a through line.
And that's 100% from my uncle. I think that is so exactly him. And there are stories in there that kind of point to that, but that's something I think I learned, really figured out while writing this, but I think that's really something I got from him.
That really like came through so strong. And also that's like why I love reading memoirs, because you get the person's voice more than anything. You kind of like get who they are at their core in a way that like when people are writing characters, you can kind of make that up, but you can't like get that. And it's like, like in a memoir, you can't help it. You're like, you're not trying to say, I'm Nabil Ayers, compassionate, or I'm Nabil, pragmatic.
Yeah.
But those are the things that come out, and whether you want to or not. And I think because of like who you are, and has obviously led to your success, and also like comes through in the success of the book.
But that's something that's also driven people crazy though, friends, and especially past relationships, of like, why don't you get really mad, or what, like, certain things that that's just, I don't know. And
I think that people, the cartoon version of a record label president is mad.
Throwing things,
loud, demanding,
right?
And you are none of those.
2022.
Well, you had mentioned your uncle Halen, and Halen is a free jazz artist, and was at 501 Canal Street, in New York. Like grew up in this like jazz scene around avant-garde jazz for the first years of your life, and then the first band that you fall in love with is Kiss. I was like,
big left turn.
Was Halen horrified?
He wasn't. He took me to see Kiss the year after my mom took me to see Kiss. Halen took me to see Kiss. Yeah. He's always been. It's so funny. I mean, my mom's younger brother, I think he's 71 now, and still an incredible jazz saxophone player. He just recorded a new album last week. He's still very active, but has always appreciated other music. And I think there's this assumption like, oh, he went to Berklee School of Music. He's like a really serious jazz musician. But I took him to so many shows when I was growing up that he absolutely loved. We went to see the Descendants, and I remember him thinking that was he's like, that's one of the best bands I've ever seen.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah.
And so like Kiss is
He didn't say that about Kiss.
So like, well, it was Kiss was when you were 7 years old. So like, what did you see in Kiss?
I mean, some of it is just that like those guys were geniuses and they were trying to get to kids like me. That some of it's just that simple, I think, and that worked. And that's why there are people who were boys in the 70s. Just a lot of us just got it. That was a thing, and it worked. But there's more to it to me. I really think I talk about this a bit in the book. But I was, I'm half black, half white. Or it's more complicated, but that's the simple version. And I remember, we had so many records when I was a kid, jazz and men and women and different races. But always thinking like, there's like John Coltrane and Stevie Wonder. I'm not as dark as those guys, and my afro is like a bit looser and kind of lumpy and messy. And obviously the Beatles, I don't look like those guys, or I don't look like Helen Reddy or any of these people. And I think there's this thing that people of all ages do where they want to identify with the artists they like, especially if you want to be in a band, which I did at 5. At every age, I wanted to be in a band. And so it was hard for me to see which one I could be in. I remember feeling that, or at least thinking that. And there really was something about Kiss. I knew they were white guys, but it was the makeup. And like, I assumed those were wigs. I don't think they were then, but there's something that was like, oh, I could actually do that. I could be in that band.
Mhm.
And it was really sort of empowering in a weird way.
And then you took up the drums. And to me, writing a book is lead singer energy.
Totally. It's all solo artist.
Right. So why do you think that you didn't go for lead singer and instead went drums?
I know, right? I don't know. I think I'm naturally a drummer. I mean, my uncle bought me a drum set when I was 2.5, but he didn't do it to get me into music. He did it because I was already playing on pots and pans, and like I was already playing drums. So that's why he bought me drums. So I mean, maybe if there had been a guitar around, I would have become a guitarist, but of course everyone can sing in the same way that you could play drums. So I don't know. Maybe I wanted to be behind the scenes, and maybe now I don't. I'm really guessing here. I don't know.
There was a time where you could have been the drummer in Death Cab for Cutie.
Maybe they asked me to audition. They didn't ask me to join the band, but I would have been good. I'm sure it would have worked. Oh, we're streaming.
And also there was a point where you talked about seeing Roy, and he had a 30-year-old drummer, and I thought,
oh, wow.
I thought you might have been around that age at that time or something like that,
Right.
and wondered if that was something that you desired.
That's funny. He's always had, I mean, he's 81 now. He's touring as we speak. He's in Europe. And I think a lot of people of that age, unless you're like a solid band, always hire younger band people to tour and everything. And so every time I've seen him or seen photos or anything, he's had younger guys. That's fun. I've actually, honestly, haven't thought about it in that context. There's a scene where I have a dream about playing with him,
Right.
but that's different than like, wow, I wonder if I could be in his band.
You didn't think about that?
Not that way, no. And I wonder, I love the music, but I don't love the way it's kind of been modernized, and it doesn't feel like it would be as fun to play to me. But maybe if we could do the 70s version.
It does seem like you were in some bands that you weren't totally enthralled with the music.
Yeah, that's a weird, that's a regret of mine. I don't regret being in any of those bands. Those are all really fun bands, and I got a lot out of them, and I'm good friends with all those people, but I never really tried. There's a part of me that wishes, like, after college and I was 21 in Seattle, that I was just like, I'm gonna find or start, which is harder as a drummer, but find the best band in the world. My favorite band exists somewhere. Drummers come and go. And instead, I sort of fell into the first real band I fell into because the drummer broke his arm. And I wasn't crazy about the band, but it was really fun. And the band was doing really well. So I joined. And the next one, they're all kind of situations like that, where it's like, oh, you guys need a drummer and it's going well. Great. I'll hang out for 3 years. But then suddenly I was 30 something and thinking like, what if I'd really, really just tried to be like great? Yeah.
With being in Roy's band, do you think that you would have had a desire to break away from him?
I mean, it's so weird to think about that, because that's even further than what I would have wanted to do at any time. Like, musically, I love the music, but I don't want to play the music.
Right.
Yeah.
You said that your favorite drummer was Terry
Bozzio
from Frank Zappa's band.
Yeah.
And I was wondering why that is.
Well, after Zappa, he was in a band called Missing Persons, like silly new wave early
Sure.
MTV band that kind of gets a lot of, oh yeah, one hit wonder, silly band, but it was actually, what, we got a fan? Walking in LA. That's right. It's Terry Bozzio back there, ladies and gentlemen. But I thought, I mean, it was, even at that age, like 10 or 11 years old, I was into really intricate kind of musicianship. And some of this was, Stuart Copeland from The Police and Neil Peart from Rush, and all those guys were on MTV. So I was familiar with all that. And to me, Missing Persons was like this really advanced, like clever, incredibly musical band. And 3 of those, it was Terry and 2 other people, all came from Zappa's band to start that band. And so I don't know anything about the band, but my assumption is that they're like, okay, we're incredible, but let's like do some stuff we can do well and make some money and get on MTV, but it was like secretly the best band in the world. And I think I kind of recognized that and really loved it.
Is that the kind of band that you would, if you would try for a band?
Then, yeah, I mean, but then I was 10. But like if it had been when I was like 20, early 20s, my jam, this is like early mid 90s Seattle, I would have wanted to be in like Jawbox or Helmet or Drive Like Jehu or like a kind of heavy, angular, dissonant guitar band. One of those bands. I loved those bands and I still do.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then you moved from this like real bohemian vibes to Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And in this like this place where you fit into to a place that is visually quite different. Was that like difficult for you?
It was wild. I mean, I was 10 when we lived in Greenwich Village in New York. My mother worked for American Express, and American Express moved a big part of the company to Salt Lake. And so we went, and I mean, there are good and bad things. Of course, it's the first place I ever lived where I was like, oh, wow, everybody looks the same and none of those people look like me. And I really stand out. And I had like an afro then, I swear I did. and it was weird. It was weird to feel like that for the first time at 10 years old, but I also am glad I didn't feel like that for the first time younger. But the good things were that, like, strangely, I was so into music. I always have been, but that was my biggest worry was we're going to move to Salt Lake City. Is there even a record store? Do bands play there? All this stuff, it's going to be over. What am I going to do? And it turns out it was the opposite. It was really easy to go to concerts. Everyone played there. My mom and I would go stand by the stage door and just meet these people. Whereas in New York, things were sold out or they're expensive or you had to be 21. And suddenly it was like, and then also that's when MTV started. So that weirdly, Salt Lake was like all music all the time. And so that was a huge positive end. And on the negative side, it was just like, yeah, kids who wanted to touch my afro or kids who asked me if I was poor or if I were adopted. It was never like super heavy racist stuff, but it was tons of like small stuff like that.
And then after that, you, for going to college, you went to Puget Sound in Seattle in the early 90s.
89, started in 89. Like
as a musician,
moment.
like talk about the right place at the right time.
So fun.
How did you did you sense that? Did you like into it? It
was a sense because I didn't know as a high school kid in Salt Lake, I didn't know about Sub Pop or those bands yet, even though they were happening. This is 1989, but my mom and I went to like Seattle and Portland and some places in California to look at colleges, and Seattle seriously just felt musical. There were record stores everywhere. Every person looked like they were in a band. There were flyers on all the poles, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is where I need to be.
Yeah. And then so then you started a record store there. Like so much of the book is being in bands and writing, and you were the president of a record label. Like you're like I feel like you kind of like gloss over the like the business side of like how like how to make it in the music industry, and you're just kind of like it's just like I just kind of like fell backwards into being the president of Beggars.
Believe it or not, this version is my editor saying there needs to be more music business stuff in this book. Yeah.
Why
was
does
less.
I would think that like to be the president of Beggars, you would have to be driving to do that and you have a business partner who you say in the book put a lot more into the business than you did because you were pursuing your personal projects.
Right.
That doesn't exactly scream being asked to be the president of a record label.
But I mean, I became the president of Beggars after 13 years of running 4AD, which is a Beggars label. So but yeah, the 4AD job, the first real record company job I had, which was 13-ish years ago, I did sort of fall into, but I knew, I mean, running Sonic Boom or co-owning Sonic Boom, the record store in Seattle, I knew so many people. It's probably similar to your job. Everyone at every record label because they needed to call us and they needed to do things with us, and worked closely with a lot of those people. And my partner Jason was like more the sort of finance guy and the business guy, and I was definitely like the promotions guy and the face guy and like, let's do a crazy thing when your band comes to town. And I think that's how I ended up being in the position that I was, where I was just really knew those people and had worked closely with them for a while, and so it was a natural fit.
And like and for you, like what has been the key to those positions? You know, what is the key?
Yeah. I mean, one key is not freaking out for sure.
I think you got that down.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is really trying to think about every band as somebody. The sort of little illustration is a friend of mine who manages one of the bands on 4AD. It's Ben Dickey who manages Future Islands. He's been really interested. We talk a lot about the book stuff. He's just interested in, and he's a great guy. And I was telling him probably a month before the book out, I was like, I'm so stressed. This book tour is a lot of stress. I'm having to put stuff together and contact people. I don't know if the press is going to be good, all these things. He's like, this is so great. Everyone in your position should have to do something like this every 10 years to remind them of what it's like for every band.
Totally.
And so in an interesting way, I think playing in bands for years, running a record store for years, even doing my own small label, which I still do. And now even this, in a weird way, has put me in a good position to just sort of see a wider view of what's going on. It's not so much like what it's like to be in a band. It's not a very specific thing like that, but it's just that I've done a lot of these things and I know how hard it is and what it feels like. And I think that maybe gives me more empathy or more understanding of what people are trying to do.
Yeah. One thing that is very clear in the book and in your life is that you, despite being so chill, you have a burning fire within you. You know, you just have this desire to make music, to be accepted creatively, to start a record label, to be the head of a record label, to be a great writer. That does not come from nowhere. And where do you think that comes from? And it is.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think comes from my father. And I think in the few brushes I've had with him, or even seeing him play live or hearing other people talk about him, and that's an easier one to say, my mother doesn't have that, my uncle doesn't have that, but my father is 81 and touring the world right now. And I know he has that. So I think some of that has to be from him.
Is there a place where that ends? Is there a satisfaction? You in the book, there's like you talk about like touring with Keen, who is this right. And they're in this huge tour bus and they're living a life that you wish you could live, and then they tour with you too, and they're like, well, these guys, they're
there's always somebody doing better, there's always somebody bigger. And mine is not to, I don't now want to be the president of Columbia now that I'm the president of Beggars.
Right.
Like, it's not that. I really do think I'm in the best place. It's not the biggest place, but it's definitely the best place. So where does it end? I think it's more just, but it's not always about the biggest thing. I've gotten so much satisfaction on my own small label, putting out my uncle's jazz records that hopefully sell 1,000 or 2 copies and maybe break even, maybe not, but it's just so fun to do. And it's so fulfilling to get a review or to, whatever, to do something.
Do you think you want to be more famous than your dad?
That's a good question. Do I want to be more famous than my dad?
Is that a driving factor?
I don't know if it's weird, because attention, I would say yes. But I've never thought fame is not so much the thing. It's been really fun I was on CBS Saturday Morning a couple of weeks ago, and that was cool. And I liked it. And I like doing it.
Or do you want your name to be bigger?
Right. Sure. Yes. Are you offering? Yeah, of course. But it's not, I don't say that, and I want to be bigger than my dad way. It's not a competitive
it's not like a driving.
I don't think so.
Are you competitive?
No. Yeah, I think I'm competitive. Yeah, I think you have to be to put out records and work with bands and be in bands and do all these things. Are like, why did this writer get this thing? Why aren't I on this?
Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Twin brother.
My mom's not, and my uncle's not.
Okay. Yeah. What is what is your next creative ambition? Because it ain't stopping here, Nabil.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. The funny thing is, I've been trying to I've been sort of pushing so hard. So, and this has always been, when I was a kid and playing in bands, I loved playing music. I also loved recording our demos and selling them at school the next day. And kind of always the business side was just as fun for me and always has been. And so now that's kind of what this has been like. I mean, this book was done in October, and I think it would have been pretty easy to kind of be like, okay, cool, publisher, go do what you do. I'll do a couple of Zooms and readings and that'll be it. But instead, I'm here and going traveling all over the place and flying every day and doing way more than anyone wants me to do or expects me to do. I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it because I want to and because this is the time to do it. And so, but there is this part of me that I just realized last week when the book came out. I was like, maybe I could just chill for a minute and see if some things actually naturally come. Maybe it doesn't have to be all push. Now that the book is out, hopefully it gets out there and people say nice things. And maybe the thing to do is not think about the next book or the next thing, but it's just to still do stuff, but maybe just see what happens in the next 6 months. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
That makes sense. We're going to turn it over to audience questions, but I had 4 pages of questions here that I completely ignored. But one that I remember writing is that has your relationship with your father affected the desire or not desire to have kids on your own?
You're not the first person to ask that question.
Well, it's there.
I never thought it had, but it would kind of be impossible to say that it hasn't, right? I mean, everybody thinks about their parents in some way, shape, or form when they're thinking about having kids. I don't have kids. My wife and I have been married for 4 years. Hope she's not watching. She's younger than I am. It's still a possibility. It's something we talk about often, but I don't think about it in the context of my father because that was such a specifically unique situation.
Right.
I would get it when people are like, well, my father is really abusive, so I'm going to not have kids because I'm afraid I'm going to do that, or I'm going to have kids and be the perfect non-abusive father. Like that makes tons of sense to me, but to me, he just didn't exist. And I know if I have kids, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
But then there's nothing else to really give or take from it. So it's a weird outside thing that just doesn't actually feel connected to me having kids.
That checks.
I'd be less doting than my mother, though.
Just
in case you're wondering. Yeah.
Just to end on a fun note, I wanted to read you my favorite line from your own book. Is that fun? My favorite line, you were talking about working at Easy Street, and you said, I worked alongside Kirsten, a wonderful pale goth with a black bob who once explained to me the sensuality of menstrual blood while blasting Nick Cave's Let Love In.
And that was it, working at that store, my first record store job, in Seattle in the early 90s, and being like a 22-year-old kid with older cool people. That's what it's all about. It was so much fun.
Yeah. What was the most fun part to write in the book?
Oh God. Most fun was either the record store stuff or the band stuff, which are all kind of in the same periods, because there are just so many characters who come in and out literally every minute at the store or when you're touring and all those things. And so it's fun to try to create those people.
Well, I remember when we had first talked about you starting to write the memoir, you said that it had started with a story that gets all of 2 paragraphs in this book of you getting pulled over and charged for possession of marijuana in Utah.
Yeah, arrested, handcuffed in the desert.
Rough.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought about making that a longer part of the book, but I was like, it's not a huge story and it doesn't matter. Yeah.
For another day.
Yeah, it's a long story.
Well, I do also want to open it up to the audience. So if you could, Daniel, how do we do questions? Okay, so maybe raise your hand, Jeff.
First of all, thank you for coming here, and thank you for everything that you've done with your life, instead of that.
Right. Do you repeat the question? Do I repeat the question?
I think it would make sense. Oh, me? Okay, the question is, Nabil obviously has had a life in music and has been driven on having a life in music. And have you ever considered playing sports?
Dude, never, but doing anything else. I mean, never seriously. But of course I thought about it. I remember when I went to college being really bummed that there were no classes in architecture. I went to a really small school, and I think I just assumed like, maybe that would be interesting. When I go to college, I want to take an architecture class because I love the sort of that kind of art. It's very linear and very mathematical. That's not to say I wanted to be an architect, but I remember being so disappointed when I felt that. And the other thing I thought about kind of when I was in college was advertising, but I never took either of those things seriously, and almost everything I did was against trying to get any kind of job or do anything. It was just go music. Yeah.
Great question. In the middle.
So your dad.
So the question is, why did Roy kind of like consent to the agreement, and why did he? What's his motive for meeting up with Nabil in Nabil's adult future?
Right. I mean, obviously, I'm guessing, but it's a great question. The times I met him as a child, there's some that I don't remember and a couple that I do remember. Some of those were actually just like run-ins on the street in New York. But there's a story that's in the book where when my mother found out she was pregnant, she called Roy and told him, and he said, "Wow, that's so great. You got what you want. I'm so happy for you." It was like this very much like, "That's what you wanted. Good job. Okay, bye." Which is, which obviously made it very clear. Okay, that's still what's happening. I don't know. I mean, I think undoubtedly he has an ego and likes attention, and maybe the times that we ran into each other, maybe he saw some of himself in me, and maybe he liked that. As an adult, I mean, I didn't actually reach out to him until I was 34, and that's when we actually got together. But he got back to me pretty easily. We met and we had this great lunch. And so I have no idea. I mean, maybe he wouldn't have done that if I was 12 and he thought I was going to ask for money or ask to be my father. And maybe it was far enough along that there was no threat of any of those things. But that's a hard question. I don't know. It's a great question.
Yeah.
The last time I saw Roy was on Central Park Summer Stage in 2000 when I was a volunteer. In your life that kind of pushed you in the direction of the business side of music? Because players, that's not something that we normally do.
The question is, why go into the business side of music, or identify a specific? That's a great question. Identify a specific event in which led to going into the business side.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly, I think I always sort of got it, even as a kid. I don't mean I didn't understand the business, but I understood that it existed. Right. Meaning when I was 7 years old and put on a living room show with my friends, and we charged everyone $1 at the door, and we put up flyers at the laundromat, that was a business, and we split the money at the end of the concert. And I loved that, and I loved drawing the flyer, and I loved putting up the flyer. So it's weirdly always been there. Whereas I think a lot of artists who end up in the business are maybe like, oh, I'm in my 30s and I want to tour. Maybe I can get a job working in music since I know so much. But I've always kind of had a foot in either side. But I mean, I remember when I was in college, I interned for Polygram, which at the time was one of the big 6 major labels. And this was like Soundgarden and PJ Harvey and lots of like great early 90s bands. And I think there were things there that were pretty exciting for me, like really seeing behind the curtain in that way, like being at a big record company, listening into my boss's conference calls, kind of learning the inner workings. There were definitely moments, and she worked out of her house, but she was great and a real mentor. There were moments in that internship where I was like, oh, wow, there is so much more here than I ever imagined. This is really exciting. I think that was probably it.
Great question. Anything else? Jeff.
I was actually inspired by your final choice footwear.
Oh, wow, I didn't see that. The gentleman, for those of you online, the gentleman is wearing Eddie Van Halen sneakers.
So I've got a 2-part question. Both parts very, very. Have you ever worked with Van Halen?
Okay. Do you want to ask the second one first, or the follow-up, or should we wait for the first one? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. The question is, Nabil Ayers, have you ever worked with Van Halen?
I've never worked with Van Halen. I tried to see the 1984 tour when I lived in Salt Lake City and could not get tickets. It sold out too fast and didn't see them until the DLR reunion show in 2007.
Did write a great essay about the guitar solo that involved
Right.
Van Halen.
Right.
Lest to not forget.
Huge fan though. Love
Yes.
Van Halen.
Okay.
And you mentioned DLR. I was curious, which do you prefer, DLR or Sam?
DLR or Sammy is the
Definitely DLR. That's a great question.
any hard-hitting journalism to follow.
Tough to follow.
Yes. These are all real questions. Yeah.
You said that your wife encouraged you to write about race. Like, how do you address it in the book? Like, how does it actually factor in? How have you reflected on it as a result?
That's the book. Pages 1 through 299. The question is, how does Nabil kind of like perceive the racial aspect of his mother and famous father and the racial dynamic there, and how does it come up in his life?
Yeah. Sort of, yeah, two questions kind of. I mean, to my mother and Roy, I mean, that I talked to her so much during this process and interviewed her a lot and really tried to get deep, which is not hard with her. She will talk and tell you a lot. And her thing at the time was, this is like a longer story that was in the book that we took out because it just felt too long. She had a younger sister who died at age 8 of a congenital heart disease. And my mother always kind of thought, and they don't know this, there's something, and I'm going to get this wrong, there's something with Ashkenazi Jewish people that sometimes if there's too much Ashkenazi Jew, there are illnesses and there are things that can happen. And my mother always thought that's why her sister died.
Interesting.
Whether or not it was true, that's in her head. And she said, for that reason, I'm never gonna have a kid with anyone who's anything like me. And so she's like, all her boyfriends to that point, she's like, there's this Irish guy, there's this guy, all different people. So I don't think it was specifically a Black person, but it was definitely specifically not a Jewish person. So there's that. And then for me, I mean, yeah, that's a much longer 300-page answer, and something I think about all the time, which is why, I mean, when my wife told me this, we'd probably been dating for a year or something like that. But even just from that, she was like, this is what you need to explore, because this is obviously something that's in your head. And maybe this would be a good way for you to learn more about what you're thinking, which is really what happened. And I don't arrive at a conclusion, but I know more about myself.
Fantastic question.
Yeah.
Are we at time? Okay, time for one more. Yes.
Right.
All
Right.
Yeah. The question is kind of like how does Roy feel about the book?
Yeah. This is, I mean, I'm glad you asked, because otherwise it would have been the first night on the book tour that somebody hasn't asked that question. So to mine, I don't know if he's read it, because I mean, I spend a lot of the book talking about what it feels like when I try to call him or try to email or try to get a hold of his family, the other people who haven't gotten back to me. And it's terrible, because it's kind of like I put myself out there and then now I'm just waiting and he doesn't pick up the phone or he doesn't call me back. And that's a lot of the anxiety. And so when I was done with the book, of course, I thought about trying to get it to him. And then I thought, that's like a lot to put myself through to do something that's kind of for him. And to me, it's very positive about him in the end. I mean, there's some ups and downs, but the title it's a lyric from his song, but it also is this obvious double sort of meaning where it's about the great things that he gave me and me being really thankful for those things. So I hope he reads it. And what I did do, I have a half brother, his son, who actually grew up with him, who I am in touch with on email. And I sent him an email 6 months ago saying, this book's coming, everyone's in it, here's what it's about. And I said, I'm not in touch with Roy or these other people. If you want to let him know, you should. And if you want me to send it to you, I will. And he just replied like, this is great, LOL, thanks. So I don't know. I have to imagine, I mean, certainly they know it. He knows about it by now. I don't know if he's actually read it, but yeah, to be revealed.
Before having this conversation, Nabil said, somebody will ask that question. The last one. What a perfect way to end it. Well, Nabil, I have so loved, I'm so glad that I have been pressuring you to come here to
Me too.
to do this. And I'm so glad. I mean, when we had initially talked about it, like, didn't know if it was going to be good. And it is.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And thank you everybody who has come out and get it and read it, because I mean, I just said I had 4 pages of questions and we got
Thank you. This
maybe
has been
1
great.
page.
And
So
thank you all for coming. And Justin, thank you so much for hosting.
of course.